The baby's cry was a raw, serrated sound in the metallic silence of the derelict ship. It wasn't a cry of simple hunger or a wet diaper. This was a scream of pure primal terror, the kind that scrapes the soul. Elias Vance rocked the swaddled bundle in his arms, his own massive, scarred hands trembling. He was a man who had stared down xenofauna hordes on the rimworlds, without flinching, but here in the cold gloom of a dying freighter, he was utterly defeated. "Shh, Lyra, please, little star. Please," he whispered, his voice a gravelly ruin. He had tried everything. The last of the synthetic milk was gone. The heating coil was dead. The ship's power was failing. And with it, the life support, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced in the crimson emergency light. He was about to try singing a broken, off-key lullaby from a childhood he barely remembered when a new sound cut through the baby's wails. It was a soft, resonant thrum, felt more than heard, a vibration that hummed through the deck plates and up into the bones of his feet. It was not a sound the Odyssey had ever made. It was alien. Elias's head snapped up, his military instincts overriding his despair. He gently laid the crying Lyra in a makeshift crib of woven cargo webbing, his movement suddenly fluid and precise. He snatched his pulse rifle from its magnetic clamp, the weight a cold comfort. The intruder alert was silent because the ship's sensors were dead. Someone or something was here. He moved like a ghost through the corridors, the thrumming growing louder, a melodic, organic sound that stood in stark contrast to the Odyssey's death rattle. It was coming from the main airlock. The outer hatch was already open, a fact that sent a fresh chill down his spine. He rounded the final corner, rifle raised, finger hovering over the trigger, and then he froze. The airlock was no longer a sterile metal chamber. It was filled with a soft, bioluminescent glow, emanating from swirling, moss-like growths that had already begun to coat the walls. Standing in the center of it all was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. She was tall and slender, with the elegant, powerful grace of a Terran panther. Her fur was the color of deep space, speckled with faint star-like iridescences. A long, sleek tail twitched with quiet curiosity behind her. She had large, luminous eyes the color of molten amber, and they held no hostility, only a deep, unsettling intelligence. And in her slender, six-fingered hands, she held not a weapon but a small, intricately carved vessel, from which wafted a scent that was inexplicably, profoundly milky. Her amber eyes met his, then drifted past him towards the distant, desperate sound of the crying baby. Her head tilted and a low, soothing purr rumbled from her chest, a sound that seemed to physically calm the very air. Elias Vance, the veteran of the Rim Wars, stood paralyzed, his weapon aimed at a mother who had come calling. 3 weeks earlier, Elias Vance would have laughed at the idea of his life ending like this, not with a bang on some glorious battlefield, but with a slow whimpering fade in the cold, unforgiving vastness of the Kuiper Belt. The Odyssey was a GTS-47 long-haul freighter, a workhorse designed for hauling ore and machine parts, not for a desperate, secretive flight with a single, precious illegal cargo. He stood on the command deck, the star-dusted blackness of space stretching before him like an infinite velvet sheet. His reflection in the reinforced glass was a ghost of the man he used to be. A jagged scar ran from his temple down to his jaw, a permanent souvenir from the Battle of Cygnus X1. His eyes, once a clear and determined blue, were now the color of a winter sky, haunted and weary. He was 42 standard years, but he felt a century older. The Coalition had promised him a pension, a quiet plot of land on a terraformed world. Instead, they'd given him a flag for a coffin and a classification of collateral damage. So he'd taken his own path. One last job. A simple courier run. It had all gone to hell. The memory was a fresh wound. The smoky bar on Tartarus Station. The man in the immaculate suit who called himself Smith. The weight of the cred stick. Just a data chip, Vance, to the drop point in the belt, no questions asked. But there were always questions. The ambush by corporate security wasn't for the data chip. It was for what was hidden with it. He'd blasted his way out, the Odyssey taking heavy damage, and only when he was in the clear did he find the hidden compartment in the cargo hold. It wasn't a secret weapon or stolen tech. It was a baby. A human baby girl no more than a few months old, with a shock of fine, copper-colored hair and eyes the color of violets. She lay in a cryo crib, a single word stitched onto her blanket, Lyra, and with her, a note on old-fashioned paper, "They will kill her for what she is." Her genes are the key. Keep her safe. Her name is Lyra. That was it. No explanation. No instructions. Just a child and a death sentence. Now the Odyssey was his metal tomb. The corporate Seki. Ships had crippled his star drive and taken out his primary comms array. He was running on auxiliary power. A ghost drifting in a sea of forgotten rocks and ice. The air was getting thin, recycled too many times. Tasting of metal and his own fear. Frost gathered in the corners of the viewports. The only warmth left in the universe was the small, sleeping form of Lyra, currently nestled against his chest in a homemade sling. He had turned the ship's small medbay into a nursery. It was a pathetic sight. A ration heater repurposed to warm formula, diapers fashioned from clean rags, and a mobile of twisted wiring and shiny scrap metal that he'd hung over the crib. A man who had killed, who had watched platoons die, now spent his hours worrying about diaper rash and sleep schedules. It was the most terrifying mission of his life. He looked down at Lyra, her tiny fist curled around his calloused finger. A feeling would well up in him then, a terrifying, painful, wonderful feeling that was so much sharper than any fear or anger. It was a purpose. He had failed to protect his squad, his world, his future, but he would not fail her. Even if it meant dying in the cold dark, he would make her last moments peaceful. The first sign of the unknown was subtle. A flicker on the dead long-range scanner, a distortion in the local magnetic field. Elias, running a diagnostic for the 100th time, dismissed it as another system ghost. The Odyssey was full of them now. But then he saw it through the viewport, a light, moving against the fixed backdrop of stars. It wasn't the sharp, angular light of a coalition or corporate ship. It was soft, shifting like a swirl of captured nebula. It was beautiful, and it was coming right for them. His veteran's mind screamed threat. He strapped Lyra into her crib, sealed the medbay door, and returned to the command deck. His pulse rifle feeling like a familiar, hated limb. He watched the vessel, no larger than a shuttle, dock with his ship with a silence that was unnerving. There was no clang of metal, no hiss of equalizing pressure. It was as if the other ship blended with the Odyssey. This was it. Corporate Sec had found them. Or something worse. He took his position, his heart a drumbeat of grim finality. He would give them one last fight for Lyra. He was ready for death. He was not ready for what came through the airlock. The standoff in the transformed airlock stretched into a minute that felt like an eternity. The feline alien's purr was a low, continuous vibration, a sound that seemed to resonate with Elias's own frantic heartbeat, subtly slowing it. Her amber eyes, with their vertical slit pupils, were fixed on him, but they kept flicking with clear, unmistakable concern towards the source of the crying. Elias's grip on the rifle tightened. "Identify yourself," he barked, his voice harsh in the bioluminescent glow. The alien female didn't startle. She slowly, deliberately raised the carved vessel in her hands. It was made of a material that looked like polished wood but swirled with internal light. She made a soft, chuffing sound. Then a series of complex, melodic clicks that his ship's, damaged universal translator couldn't begin to decipher, but the meaning was as clear as starlight. "I bring sustenance." Lyra's cries reached a new peak of desperation. The alien took a slow, careful step forward. Elias tightened his finger on the trigger. "Stop, right there." She paused, her ears tufted with delicate, black fur flattening slightly against him, her skull in what he could only interpret as frustration or sadness. Then she did something extraordinary. She slowly knelt, placing the vessel on the deck plating. She then raised her empty hands, palms open, and made a gesture from her chest towards him, then back towards the crying. It was a universal cross-species plea. "Let me help." Every instinct, every hour of combat training screamed at Elias to open fire. An unknown biological entity had just breached his ship and was attempting to integrate its own ecosystem into his airlock. This was a top-tier biohazard scenario, but he looked at her eyes. There was no malice there. No greed, no conquest. He saw only a deep, profound empathy, a mirror of the worry that had been gnawing at him for weeks. He was a man who trusted his gut more than any sensor. And his gut, for the first time in years, was not screaming danger. It was whispering hope. With a curse that was more prayer than profanity, he slowly, shakily lowered the rifle. He didn't deactivate it, but he slung it over his shoulder. He nodded towards the vessel, then jerked his head in the direction of the medbay. The alien's ears perked up. A new, softer purr rumbled in her chest. She retrieved the vessel and rose, moving with that same liquid grace. She followed him as he led the way, her presence both terrifying and calming. When they entered the med bay, Lyra's face was red and streaked with tears. The alien female stopped in the doorway, her large eyes taking in the pathetic makeshift nursery. She saw the repurposed ration heater, the rags, the twisted mobile. Her gaze lingered on Elias's face, and in that moment he felt a staggering, unspoken understanding pass between them. She saw a lone, desperate male, trying and failing to care for an infant. She saw a father. She moved to the crib, her movements impossibly gentle. Elias tensed, ready to spring, but he forced himself to watch. She leaned over Lyra, her purr amplifying into a deep, resonant thrum that filled the small room. Lyra's cries hitched, then softened into hiccups. The baby's violet eyes, wide with shock, fixed on the strange, beautiful face above her. The alien female dipped a fingertip into the vessel. The liquid inside was pearlescent, glowing with a soft internal light. She brought it to Lyra's lips. The baby, driven by instinct, suckled the finger clean. A moment of silence. Then Lyra made a small, contented sound and opened her mouth for more. Elias felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. He slumped against the wall, his legs suddenly weak. The sight of Lyra finally eating, of her distress melting away, was a relief so powerful it was physically painful. The alien, he couldn't keep thinking of her. As the alien turned her head towards him, she pointed a slender finger to her own chest and made a soft, two-syllable sound. Cathar. It was a name. He understood. Elias, he rasped, tapping his own chest. And Lyra. Cathar looked at the baby and repeated the name, her voice a gentle melody. Lyra. She then gestured for him to bring Lyra to her. After a moment's hesitation, he did. He watched, his heart in his throat, as Cathar sat on the floor, cradling Lyra in the crook of one arm, and began to carefully feed her the luminous milk from the vessel. It was a scene of such impossible, cross-species tenderness that Elias felt the ice around his own heart begin to crack. Over the next several hours, a fragile, silent routine established itself. Cathar rarely left Lyra's side. Her presence seemed to have a soothing effect on the entire ship. The bioluminescent moss from the airlock began to spread, not like an invasion, but like a gentle healing, creeping along the corridors and pushing back the oppressive gloom with its soft light. Elias noticed the ship's oxygen levels had stabilized, and the temperature had risen to a comfortable warmth. She was healing his ship as she was healing his child. He watched her interact with Lyra. She would hum melodies that sounded like solar winds and ringing crystals. She would trace patterns on Lyra's skin with her claw-tipped fingers, and the baby would giggle, her tiny hands reaching for the star-speckled fur. Cathar was a scientist, a doctor, and a mother all in one. During one of Lyra's naps, Elias found Cathar in the airlock, which was now a lush miniature forest. She was tending to a larger version of the moss, from which several of the milk vessels seemed to be growing. She saw him and gestured to the moss, then to her own chest, and then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire ship. She was sharing her own life support system with them. He brought out his datapad, pulling up a star chart. Where? He asked, pointing at her. Then at the starry void outside. Cathar understood. She leaned over, her scent a mix of rain-soaked earth and night-blooming flowers. She pointed a long finger to a region of space the Coalition had marked as uncharted anomalous. It was a place known only as the Veil, a nebula so dense it was considered unnavigable. Legend said ships that went in never came out. She then touched the datapad and drew a simple symbol with her claw, a circle with a spiral at its center, like a galaxy. It was the same symbol that was carved on the milk vessel. Her eyes met his, filled with a deep, ancient sorrow. This wasn't a random rescue. She had been looking for them, or more specifically for Lyra. The piece was shattered by a violent shudder that ran through the Odyssey's hull. A proximity alert he'd rigged to the last functioning external camera blared to life. On the screen, emerging from behind a large asteroid, was the sleek, predatory shape of a corporate security interdictor-class vessel. Its hull was emblazoned with the logo of Gentech, Omnicorp, a double helix entwined, with a lightning bolt. They had found him. Cathar! Elias yelled, his soldier's persona snapping back into place. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted to the command deck. Cathar was right behind him, her body low to the ground, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Her ears were flat against her skull, her amber eyes narrowed to slits. The comms crackled to life, a voice dripping with synthetic calm. GTS Odyssey, this is Gentech Omnicorp security vessel Aconite. Power down your systems and prepare for boarding. You are harboring stolen property. Comply and your end will be swift. Stolen property, Elias muttered, the words tasting like ash. They were talking about Lyra, a child. He slammed his fist on the console. We've got no engines, no shields, and weapons are offline. We're a sitting duck. He turned to Cathar, his face a mask of grim resignation. You need to go. Take your ship. Get out of here. Cathar looked from him to the screen showing the interdictor. She shook her head, a very human gesture she must have picked up from him. She pointed a determined finger at the medbay where Lyra was sleeping. No, Elias said, his voice breaking. You can't fight them. They'll kill you. Just take her. Save her, please. It was the hardest sentence he had ever spoken. To let Lyra go was to tear out his own heart, but it was the only way she would live. But Cathar was not listening. Her eyes were fixed on the Gentech logo on the view screen. The growl in her chest deepened into a sound of pure, undiluted hatred. It was a sound Elias recognized. It was the sound he made when he thought of the xenofauna that had wiped out his squad. She moved to the center of the command deck, ignoring his protests. She closed her eyes, and the bioluminescent moss that had spread throughout the ship began to pulse with a rapid, frantic light. The soft glow intensified, concentrating around Cathar. Tendrils of light snaked from the walls and coalesced around her hands. She was interfacing with her ship, or perhaps her ship was an extension of her. A holographic display, not of his technology, flickered to life in the air between them. It showed a DNA double helix, but it was wrong. Sections of it were highlighted, spliced with segments of code that were distinctly non-human. It was Lyra's genetic sequence. Cathar pointed to the altered parts, then to her own chest. Then she projected another image, a different helix, elegant and complex, woven with light. It was her own genetics. The pieces crashed together in Elias's mind with the force of a meteor strike. Lyra wasn't just a random child with valuable genes. She was a hybrid, a human-Cathar hybrid. The stolen property was a lie. Gentech hadn't created her. They had discovered her, or captured her, and she had been rescued. Her genes weren't just a key. They were a bridge between two species. Cathar then projected a final devastating image. It was a memory seen through her eyes. A world of breathtaking beauty, with forests of crystalline trees and rivers of liquid light, and descending upon it Gentech ships. Not to trade, not to explore, to harvest. They were culling her people, studying them, trying to reverse engineer their biological technology, their connection to life itself. Lyra was the result of one of their experiments. A forced fusion, a living key to understanding and ultimately destroying Cathar's entire race. The alien mother hadn't just found a random crying baby. She had tracked down her own daughter. Elias stared at Cathar, the truth reshaping every interaction they'd had. Her immediate, instinctual care, the way her milk was perfectly compatible, the deep, soulful connection she had with Lyra. This wasn't altruism. This was motherhood of the most primal kind. He had been protecting a child. She had been reclaiming her own. The comms crackled again, the voice now impatient. Odyssey, this is your final warning. Power down or we will open fire. Elias looked at Cathar, the feline mother, her body thrumming with protective fury. He looked towards the medbay, where their daughter, theirs now, in every way that mattered, slept. The veteran who had lost everything saw a new mission. A true mission, not for credits or for a corrupt coalition, but for family. Okay, he said, his voice steady and cold. New plan. You're not just a mother. And I'm not just a soldier anymore. He tapped his rifle. I'll draw their fire. I'll give them a target. You do what you do. Get on their ship. A fierce, understanding light ignited in Cathar's amber eyes. She nodded. She reached out and for the first time placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, electric, and filled with a shared purpose. The bond between them was no longer one of tentative alliance. It was the unbreakable bond of parents going to war for their child. The Odyssey's remaining thrusters flared to life. A pathetic attempt at evasion. As expected, the Aconite responded not with a full volley, but with a precise disabling shot aimed at the engines. They wanted the ship and its cargo intact. The blast rocked the freighter, and alarms Elias had forgotten about began to wail. It was the distraction they needed. While the corporate sex ship moved in for a clean boarding maneuver, Cathar's organic vessel, which had remained seamlessly docked, detached. It didn't fly. It seemed to bleed into the shadows of the Odyssey's hull, becoming virtually invisible against the dark metal. It was a predator stalking its prey. Elias, meanwhile, was preparing for his last stand. He barricaded himself in the corridor leading to the medbay. He had rigged several emergency power cells to overload, creating crude explosive choke points. His hands moved with a calm efficiency he hadn't felt since the war. This was different, though. This wasn't about survival or duty. It was about buying time. Every second he held them off was a second closer to Cathar succeeding. He heard the metallic clang of magnetic grapples and the high-pitched whine of cutting torches on the main airlock. They were coming. A soft sound made him turn. Cathar had not yet left. She stood at the entrance to the medbay, Lyra held securely against her chest in a sling she had fashioned from a silken, fibrous material she produced herself. She had integrated Lyra into her own being, a kit nestled safe against its mother. She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with an emotion that transcended species. Fear not for herself but for him. She chuffed softly, a questioning, worried sound. "I'll be okay," he lied, his voice rough. He gave her a grim smile. "Go, get our daughter to safety." He expected her to leave. Instead, she took a swift step forward, closing the distance between them. She leaned in, and for a breathtaking second he thought she was going to, kiss him? It was a foolish human thought. What she did was far more intimate. She pressed her forehead against his, her warm breath fanning his face. Her purr escalated into a powerful, resonant frequency that vibrated through his very skull. A flood of images, feelings, and sensations filled his mind, not words but pure meaning. He saw her world again, felt her love for its singing forests. He felt the agony of her capture, the horror of the Gentech labs, the devastating loss of her child. And then he felt her gratitude, a profound soul-deep gratitude for him, for the scarred human soldier who had protected her cub when she could not. She was sharing her memory, her pain, and her heart. It lasted only a second, but when she pulled away, Elias was gasping. Tears he hadn't known he could still produce welled in his eyes. The connection was gone, but the echo remained, a warmth in the center of his chest. He was no longer alone. He nodded, unable to speak. Cathar turned and melted into the shadows of her own living ship, which detached and began its silent, deadly journey towards the Aconite. The first corporate sec troopers in matte black armor stormed the corridor. Elias dropped two with precise pulse fire before ducking behind. A bulkhead as return. Fire scorched the metal around him, the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and melted steel. "He's dug in!" one yelled. "Flank him." Elias fought with the cold, calculated fury of a cornered animal. He used his knowledge of the ship's layout, his makeshift explosives, and every dirty trick he'd learned in the trenches. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to stall. For every minute that passed, he imagined Cathar, a spectral hunter, moving through the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the corporate ship. He took a glancing hit to his shoulder, the armor weave of his flight suit melting and searing his skin. He grunted, shoving the pain down. He thought of Lyra's laugh. He thought of Cathar's forehead against his. He had a family to protect. The concept was so new, so powerful, it was like a drug. He heard a new sound over the comms of the advancing troopers. Screams, not of pain, but of sheer, unadulterated terror. Then the lights on the Odyssey flickered, and the bioluminescent moss flared a brilliant, angry red. Cathar was on the Aconite. She was turning their own ship against them. A trooper rounded the corner and Elias fired, catching him in the chest. The man fell. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of fires and the panicked, confused chatter from the enemy comms. He had bought her the time she needed. Suddenly the Aconite's running lights went dead. Its engine flare died. It was a ghost ship. A moment later, the corporate troopers still on the Odyssey froze as one, their weapons clattering to the deck. Their armor was locking up, systems overriding. A final, terrified scream echoed from one of their helmets before the comms went completely silent. It was over. Elias, breathing heavily, leaned against the wall, his shoulders screaming in pain. He had done it. Then his own ship's comms lit up with an incoming Priority 1 Coalition frequency. A grizzled, familiar face filled the screen. Admiral Valerius, his old commanding officer. "Vance, by the stars, is that you? We just picked up a massive, energy spike and a distress beacon from a Gentech vessel identifying as the Aconite. They're reporting a biological contagion, a xenopredator. What in the hell is going on out there? Before Elias could answer, a new alert flashed. The Aconite's self-destruct sequence had been activated. Gentech would rather destroy the ship and all evidence, including Lyra, than let it fall into enemy hands, or let the contagion escape. Cathar, Elias whispered. She was still on there. He stumbled to the command deck, his injury forgotten. On the view screen, the Aconite was beginning to vent atmosphere. He slammed his hand on the comms. Cathar, get out of there! It's going to blow! There was no response. He could see her small, organic ship still attached to the Aconite's hull, but it wasn't moving. Was she trapped, hurt? Admiral Valerius's voice was grim. Elias, a coalition cruiser is en route, ETA 10 minutes. Stand down. We'll handle this. You'll be too late, Elias roared. He looked at the dying corporate ship, at the vessel that held the mother of his child. He had just found her. He couldn't lose her now. He made a decision. It was suicide, but it was the only choice. He ran to the airlock, grabbing an emergency thruster pack. I'm going over. Vance, that's an order. Stand down. My family is on that ship, Admiral, Elias said, his voice quiet but absolute. He cut the comms. The journey across the void was a blur of cold and terror. He used the thrusters to propel himself towards the Aconite, the massive ship growing larger and more terrifying with every second. He landed hard on its hull near Cathar's ship. The self-destruct alarm was a muffled, hysterical bleat from within. He found the airlock Cathar had used. The metal twisted and torn open from the inside. He climbed in. The interior was a nightmare. The sterile white corridors were now a grotesque garden. The bioluminescent moss was everywhere, but it was pulsing erratically, its light a sickly green. It had grown over consoles, fused doors shut, and Elias felt a chill. It had encased the bodies of corporate sec troopers, holding them in a gentle but unbreakable grip. They were alive, their eyes wide with terror but unharmed. She hadn't killed them. She had neutralized them. He followed the trail of deepest light, a path leading to the ship's bridge. Cathar! He found her on the bridge. She was kneeling in the center of the room, one hand plunged into the central command console as if the metal were water. Her organic technology was fused with the ship's systems, fines of light and circuitry crawling up. Her arm, she was trying to stop the self-destruct, but the Gentech countermeasures were fighting back. Electrical arcs snapped around her, and she was trembling with the strain, a low whine of pain escaping her lips. Lyra, still safe in her sling, was crying. Cathar, we have to go, now! Elias yelled, rushing to her side. She shook her head, her eyes wild. She gestured at the console. She wasn't just trying to stop the destruct. She was downloading something. The entire Gentech database on her people, on their experiments, on Lyra. The countdown on the main screen hit 60 seconds. There's no time! Leave it! He grabbed her arm, trying to pull her hand free. It was locked in place. 50 seconds. Cathar looked from the data stream to him, her eyes filled with a desperate conflict. She could save the data, or she could save herself and their daughter. 40 seconds. With a wrenching cry that was half roar, half sob, she made her choice. She tore her hand from the console, the connection severing with a shower of sparks. She had chosen them. Elias didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her and Lyra, activating the thruster pack. They shot back down the corridor, through the ravaged airlock, and out into the cold vacuum just as the Aconite's core went critical. The explosion was silent and brilliant, a miniature sun blooming in the darkness, consuming the evidence of Gentech's sins. The shockwave hit them, sending them tumbling through the void, a tangle of human, alien, and child, clinging to each other as their world turned to fire. Elias awoke to the sound of soft purring and the smell of blooming moss. He was back in the med bay of the Odyssey. His shoulder was bandaged with a cool, gel-like substance that had stopped the pain. Cathar was beside him, Lyra nursing contentedly at her chest. The feline mother looked exhausted. Her star-speckled fur matted in places, but her eyes were calm. She had saved them, using her ship to catch them in the void and bring them home. The view screen showed a coalition cruiser, the Valiant holding position nearby. Admiral Valerius's face was back on the comms, his expression unreadable. The data you sent from the Aconite before it blew. It's staggering. Elias. Gentech's operations are a violation of a dozen interstellar laws. The board has already been arrested. The company is falling. He paused, his eyes shifting to Cathar and the baby. And the individuals on your ship. They are to be granted full asylum and citizenship under the Coalition's Protected Sentient Species Act. Your record is expunged. You're a free man, Vance, a hero even. Elias didn't care about being a hero. He looked at Cathar, who met his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate blink, a gesture of ultimate trust and affection in her culture he somehow knew. He blinked back. Weeks later, the Odyssey was a different ship. It was no longer a dying freighter, but a living home. Cathar's biological technology had fully integrated, creating a warm, breathable, beautiful environment. The corridors were now pathways through a soft, glowing forest. The command deck was open to a canopy of shimmering, leaf-like structures that displayed the star charts in living light. Elias sat on the floor, Lyra giggling as she practiced pulling herself up on his legs. She had grown stronger, her violet eyes bright with intelligence and a happiness he had once thought impossible for her. Cathar moved beside him, her tail curling around his waist as she sat, handing him a cup of water. They were a family. A strange, impossible, wonderful family, forged in the cold of space and the warmth of sacrifice. He had set a course for the Veil, for Cathar's home. It was time for Lyra to see her other world, for Cathar to return to her people, and for him, the veteran who had found his war's end not in peace, but in purpose, to find a new home. As he looked out at the swirling colors of the nebula that marked the edge of the Veil, he felt a profound sense of belonging. The story of the scarred soldier and the crying baby was over. A new one was just beginning. Cathar placed a hand on his arm and pointed towards the viewport. Deep within the nebula, a pattern of lights was blinking, a complex rhythmic sequence. It wasn't random. It was a signal, a welcome, and something more. A warning. The light formed the same symbol she had drawn on his datapad weeks ago. The spiral galaxy. It was calling them home, but Elias knew, with a soldier's certainty, that the war with Gentech was only the first battle. The secrets waiting for them in the Veil would change everything.